Queen Zyril of the Valari Empire stood in the grand hall of the Starflower Throne, surrounded by light and color. The walls shimmered with living crystal, changing hues with the rhythm of the room's heartbeat. Above, delicate ribbons of silver. Light floated in the air, twisting slowly, as if the palace itself was alive and breathing. Outside the hall's giant windows, space stretched like a velvet ocean, dotted with glowing stars and the faint curve of Valeria's twin moons. She was dressed in the ceremonial robes of her people, long, flowing layers of iridescent fabric that seemed to move like water when she walked. The crown upon her head was not just metal. It was a living crown of tiny floating star orbs, each one representing a world under her rule. Zyril's deep violet eyes swept over the gathered crowd, nobles, governors, ambassadors from distant systems, and finally landed on the man she was about to marry. Captain Elias Mar of Earth stood at the far end of the hall just outside, the central light. Compared to the towering, jewel-scaled Valari, he looked ordinary. He was tall for a human, but among the Valari he seemed small. His skin was pale with a touch of sun-warm color, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes a warm brown that seemed to see too much. He wore a simple ceremonial uniform, dark blue with silver trim, yet even in such a grand place, he stood with a quiet confidence, as if he belonged here. The union was not born from love, not yet. It was politics. For decades, the Valari Empire and the Sol Confederacy had been distant neighbors, meeting only in trade and rare diplomacy. But recently, an interstellar misunderstanding, a dispute over a mineral-rich moon, had brought tensions close to breaking. Instead of war, both sides agreed to something bold, a marriage between their leaders, or rather between the Valari. Queen herself and one of Earth's most trusted envoys. It had seemed at first like a small risk to Zyril. Humans were interesting creatures. Adaptable, emotional, often unpredictable, but harmless in the grand scale of the galaxy. A political marriage to a human would be symbolic, nothing more. She would remain the true power. The human captain would play his part, smile for the public, and keep the peace. At least, that was what she had believed. The royal announcer's voice rang through the hall, smooth and rich. On this day, in the presence of the stars and the witnessing worlds, we unite two paths into one. Queen Zyril of the Valari Empire and Captain Elias Mar of the Sol Confederacy. Elias stepped forward. His movement was not flashy, yet every eye followed him. He walked with steady purpose, his boots clicking softly on the crystal floor. When he reached the queen, he bowed, not too deeply, not too shallowly, just enough to honor her without making himself seem small. The ceremony began with the exchange of the bonding crystal. It was a centuries-old Valari tradition. A crystal sphere, grown from the living minds of Valaria's core, was passed between the two, recording the energy of their thoughts and feelings at the moment of union. The stronger the bond, the brighter. The crystal would glow for centuries. An attendant brought the crystal forward, carrying it on a silver cushion. It was the size of a small fruit, shimmering with shifting colors like trapped sunlight. Zyril took the crystal first. As custom demanded, she focused on her duty, her promise to guide this marriage with wisdom and protect the alliance it represented. The crystal warmed faintly in her hand, a soft glow swirling inside. She passed it to Elias. The human took it gently, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest second. His touch was warm, almost startling in its humanity. He looked down at the crystal, and for a moment his expression changed. His eyes softened, and the corners of his mouth curved upward, not in mockery, but in a quiet, knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that said he was thinking of something far deeper than what was happening in the room. And then the crystal flared. Gasps rose from the audience as light burst within it, not in the usual slow, gentle glow, but in a sudden, brilliant pulse, like a heartbeat of pure energy. The colors inside swirled faster, richer, alive in a way that even Zyril had never seen before. The light bathed both of them, spilling across the grand hall. The announcer froze, unsure if this was part of the script. The nobles whispered to each other, puzzled. Elias held the crystal for a few seconds more, then passed it back to her with a calm, almost amused look in his eyes. Zyril took it, still feeling its heat in her palms. "What did you do?" she asked quietly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the crowd. "Nothing special," Elias said with an easy shrug. "Just thought about what I was agreeing to." Something in his tone made her want to press the question, but the ceremony moved on. Vows were spoken, hers in the melodic ancient Valari tongue, his in smooth, clear English. The marriage bands were exchanged, their designs merging human simplicity with Valari artistry. Finally, the union was sealed with the formal joining of hands beneath the Starflower Throne's light. When the final words were spoken, the crowd erupted into respectful applause. But as they walked side by side down the long hall, Zyril found herself glancing at Elias more than once. There was nothing arrogant in his posture, but there was a certainty, a quiet presence that did not match the image of a minor species representative. She could not forget the crystal's strange reaction or the way he had smiled at it. Outside the hall, the city of Valeria Prime spread before them, gleaming towers of living stone, bridges that seemed to float in the air, gardens suspended between the clouds. It was her world, her empire, her home. She had always thought of it as unshakably hers. But as she saw her new husband take in the view, his eyes searching every detail as if storing it for later use, she wondered, just for a fleeting moment, if she had underestimated him. The celebration continued into the evening. There were feasts, music, and dances from both worlds. Elias moved through the crowd with surprising ease, speaking to alien nobles as if they were old friends, laughing at their jokes and listening closely to their words. He did not seem nervous. He did not seem lost. When the night finally quieted, and they were alone in the private royal chambers, Zyril studied him across the room. "You handled yourself well today," she said, her voice neutral. "Thank you," Elias replied, loosening the collar of his ceremonial uniform. "It's a rare day when you get married in front of half the galaxy." She tilted her head slightly. "And the crystal?" Its reaction was unusual. He met her gaze, the faintest trace of that same smile playing at his lips. Maybe it liked what it saw, and though his words were light, something in his eyes made her think he was hiding a truth she could not yet see. In the quiet hum of the palace night, Queen Zyril realized the political marriage she had thought so simple might become something far more complex and far more dangerous in ways she had never imagined. The first morning after the wedding, Queen Zyril expected a quiet start. Valari custom dictated that newly bonded rulers took a day to rest and attune their spirits. Usually, it was an excuse to avoid official duties and let the public imagine some romantic mystery behind closed doors. Zyril, however, was not good at resting. She had ruled since she was barely 20 and had never known a day without a meeting, a crisis, or some kind of political fire to put out. This morning was no different. She was already reviewing reports on a glowing data screen when Elias walked into the room. He was still in the soft navy robe provided by the palace attendants. His hair was slightly messy and he carried a mug of steaming Valari tea. "You start working before breakfast?" he asked, sitting across from her without hesitation. "Ruling an empire is not a part-time task," she replied, glancing at him over the rim of her crystal reading lenses. "Elias, took a slow sip, and studied her screen from where he sat. Trade Council dispute in the 4th sector, he said, reading the report upside down. Looks like the mining guild is refusing to honor their shipping quotas again. Ziral's eyes narrowed slightly. How do you know that language? He smiled faintly. They gave me some briefings before I came here. I learned quickly. That answer seemed too simple for her liking. Most humans took months to learn even basic Valari trade script. She decided not to push the matter yet. The small problem that wasn't small by mid-morning, the palace was buzzing. The air carried the faint scent of sky lilies from the high gardens, but under it lay the sharper, invisible scent of political tension. A messenger arrived, nervous, his scales dull with worry. Your Majesty, he said, bowing to Ziral. The representatives from the 4th Sector Mining Guild have arrived early. They demand an immediate audience. Ziral sighed. Very well. Prepare the West Hall. To her surprise, Elias stood up. Mind if I sit in? This is a matter of internal governance, she said, trying to keep her tone polite but firm. Of course, he replied easily. But it also affects the trade alliance between our people, right? A shortage in your shipments could raise costs in human colonies, too. She hesitated. It was technically true, and there was no harm in letting him watch. He might even learn how little influence a human could have in Valari politics. Very well. Observe quietly. The West Hall discussion. The West Hall was smaller than the Grand Hall, but still grand by human standards. A long table of living wood curved in a graceful arc, its surface slowly shifting patterns like ripples in water. Seated at one side were the mining guild's delegates, 3 broad-shouldered Valari with scales the color of molten gold. Their leader, Guildmaster Thar, was known for his stubbornness. From the first moment, the discussion was tense. Our quotas are impossible, Thar declared. The meteor storms have delayed shipments, and the tunnels are unstable. We cannot meet your demands without risking lives. Ziral's voice was calm but firm. The quotas are set by agreement. If they are not met, the planetary councils will suffer shortages, and the other sectors will accuse you of hoarding resources. The guildmaster spread his clawed hands. Then they will have to understand we are not miracle workers. Ziral felt her patience thinning. This was the 3rd time in 2 years the guild had tried to renegotiate under the excuse of emergencies. She opened her mouth to respond, and Elias spoke first. I might be wrong, he began, leaning forward. Slightly. But it sounds like the problem isn't just the quotas, it's trust. The room went still. The Valari delegates looked at him with faint irritation. Outsiders were not meant to interrupt internal debates. Elias continued, unfazed. If the other sectors think you're hoarding, they'll assume you're putting profit over unity. If you think the Crown doesn't understand your challenges, you'll assume they're ignoring your reality. That's a recipe for disaster. Thar narrowed his eyes. And what would a human know of Valari resource politics? Elias smiled faintly. Not much. But I do know that when both sides think the other is acting in bad faith, no amount of numbers will fix the problem. You need a gesture that proves you're willing to cooperate. Ziral studied him, curious where he was going with this. What sort of gesture? Thar asked, skeptical but slightly intrigued. Pick a small shipment, Elias said. Deliver it early, even if it costs you extra. Make it public. Let everyone see you're willing to go beyond the minimum when needed. In return, ask for the Crown to send an inspection team to your tunnels, not to punish you, but to show they understand the challenges you're facing. Once people see you're transparent, they'll stop assuming the worst. There was a long pause. It was a simple idea. Almost too simple. Yet Ziral could see the shift in the delegates' expressions. Pride was still there, but also a spark of consideration. It offered them a way to save face without losing ground. "We will discuss this proposal," Thar said finally, his tone less sharp than before. After the meeting. When the delegates left, Ziril turned to Elias. "That was not observing quietly." "I said I'd observe," Elias replied with a grin. "But I never promised to stay silent if I had something useful to add." She should have been annoyed, but she couldn't deny his words had moved the discussion forward. The guild was far from easy to sway, yet Elias had made them pause without demanding or threatening. That was rare. "You do this often?" she asked. "What?" "Step into a room where you know nothing and make people listen." He chuckled. "You'd be surprised how often that works. People like to think they're the only ones with problems, but usually they're just different versions of the same ones." Ziril found herself wondering again about his background. His official file said diplomat, but that word could mean many things. Whispers in the palace by evening. Word of the meeting had spread through the palace. The Valari court thrived on gossip, and today's whispers were about the human husband who talks like a counselor. Some nobles were amused, some were cautious, a few were openly wary. Humans were supposed to be charming guests, not political actors. In the high garden, Ziril overheard two ministers talking in low voices. "He's clever," one said, "too clever for his kind." "Cleverness in the wrong place can be dangerous," the other replied. Ziril said nothing, but she remembered the strange light in the bonding crystal, the quiet confidence in his eyes. Perhaps the ministers were right to be wary, but perhaps they were also underestimating him. Dinner in the Sky Chamber. That night she invited Elias to dine in the Sky Chamber, a glass-walled room that hung above the palace gardens like a floating lantern. Below them, the city lights shimmered like a living constellation. She served him Valari moonfruit and spiced grain stew, curious how a human would react to her people's flavors. To her surprise, he tried everything without hesitation, even the glowing syrup that many off-worlders found too strong. "You adapt quickly," she said, watching him take another spoonful. "It's not hard if you keep an open mind," he replied. "Besides, food tells you a lot about a culture. What you value, what you share." Do humans study every culture they meet this closely? "Not all humans," Elias said with a small smile. "But some of us like to be prepared." There, it was again, that word, spoken as if it meant more than it sounded. The Queen's quiet realization. When the meal ended, they stood together at the edge of the glass wall, looking out over Valaria Prime. The stars reflected faintly in the glass, framing their faces in the same distant light. "You know," Elias said softly, "this is a beautiful world. Strong, too. But even strong worlds can break if people stop believing they're on the same side." Ziril turned to study him. His words were simple, but they carried a weight she could feel. She realized that since the wedding, he had already spoken to ministers, guild leaders, and advisors, always leaving the conversations just slightly changed. Perhaps, she thought, his real might was not something loud or forceful. Perhaps it was the quiet way he shaped the air in a room without anyone noticing until later, and that, in its own way, was more dangerous than any weapon. The day of the interstellar summit arrived with a sky full of stars. The grand hall of the Valari Palace was filled with representatives from many worlds. They came from the Krith Dominion, the Lyrian Collective, the Sorith Alliance, and other star systems. The room buzzed with quiet conversations and the soft glow of energy fields that floated above the polished floor. Queen Ziril stood at the head of the hall, dressed in her royal robes, calm and poised. Beside her stood Captain Elias Mar, the human she had married only weeks before. Many in the room still whispered about him. The minor species diplomat, who had surprised the Valari with his sharp mind and calm presence. Giral watched as the other delegations took their places. The Krith Dominion representatives were known for their skill in negotiation and their tough, often ruthless tactics. They were tall, with shimmering blue skin and sharp eyes that missed nothing. They rarely smiled and never showed weakness. The summit was meant to discuss new trade routes and alliances, but Giral knew it could easily turn into a contest of power and influence. She had prepared carefully and expected long hours of tense talks. When the discussions began, the Krith delegates wasted no time in pushing their demands. They spoke in complex, twisting sentences designed to confuse and trap others in promises that would only benefit the Krith. Giral saw Elias watching closely, his eyes sharp and alert. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped forward with quiet confidence. "Esteemed delegates," Elias began, his voice clear and steady, "we are here to build partnerships that benefit all our peoples. It is not only strength or technology that makes a system powerful, but the trust and respect we share." The Krith lead negotiator, a tall figure named Rek, raised a slender hand. "Trust is earned through power and cunning, Captain. Words are cheap." Elias smiled gently. "True, Rek, but words can also open doors that weapons cannot." The room fell silent. The Krith were not used to being challenged in such a calm and polite way. Over the next hours, Elias spoke carefully but clearly. He listened more than he talked, watching how the Krith changed their tactics when he responded with unexpected humor and kindness. When they tried to trap him in legal language, he answered with simple questions that revealed contradictions. At one point, a Krith envoy accused the Valari of hiding information about the stability of a new trade route. Elias responded not with anger, but with a story from his home world. A story about two neighbors who built a bridge together by trusting each other, even when they did not fully understand the other's ways. The story touched many in the room. The tension eased. Queen Giral observed the change with growing surprise. Elias's quiet strength was different from any leader she had known. He did not force others. Instead, he made them want to work with him. During a break, the Valari ambassadors whispered to each other. "The human captain is turning the Krith's own tactics against them," one said. "He is patient and kind, but his mind is sharp, as a blade." Elias took a moment alone in the palace gardens. The stars above were clear, and the soft wind carried the scent of sky lilies. He thought about the Krith, fierce and proud yet willing to listen. He remembered the lessons from his people, that understanding and patience could change even the hardest hearts. When the summit resumed, Elias was invited to lead a discussion between the Krith and Valari delegates. He suggested new terms that were fair and open, where all sides could see the details clearly. Rek, the Krith leader, surprised everyone by agreeing. "Your approach is unusual, but effective." At the end of the day, the summit concluded with new agreements that pleased almost everyone. The Valari and humans would share new trade routes, and the Krith promised to cooperate with fewer demands. Queen Giral approached Elias after the meeting. "You did more than I expected. How did you do it?" Elias looked at her, his eyes warm. "We humans have had to live among many kinds of people. We learn to listen, to find what we share, even when it seems difficult. It's not about being stronger or smarter. It's about being open." Giral nodded slowly. She realized that Elias's real power was his ability to bring others together, not by force, but by trust. That night, as the palace lights dimmed and the stars shone outside, the queen thought about the future. With Elias by her side, the Valari Empire might face many challenges, but together they had found a new way to meet them, with minds joined and hearts open. The peace from the summit lasted only a few days before shadows began to creep into the palace. Queen Zyril sat in her private study, the soft glow of the Valari moons filtering through the tall windows. She was reading a report on new trade regulations when a message arrived from one of her closest advisors, Minister Calair. The Lyrian Collective has sent a warning, Calair said quietly as he entered the room. His normally calm face was tense. They question the new agreements and suggest that the Valari may be giving too much to the humans. Zyril frowned. The Lyrians were proud and secretive. Their fleets were smaller than the Krith, but their diplomats were clever and skilled in subtle manipulation. "Has Elias heard?" she asked. "Not yet," Calair replied. "I thought you should know first." Zyril nodded. "Thank you." A visit from the Lyrian envoy later that day. A Lyrian envoy arrived at the palace. She was tall and graceful, with silver hair and eyes that gleamed like polished steel. Her name was Velair, and she carried herself with the quiet power of someone used to being obeyed. Zyril received her in the council chamber, a room lined with glowing panels that showed the history of the Valari Empire. Elias was already there, standing calmly beside the queen. Velair bowed with a slight smile. "Your Majesty, Captain Mar, the Lyrian Collective wishes to speak frankly." Zyril nodded. "Please, speak." Velair's eyes flicked to Elias, then back to Zyril. "The new trade agreements favor the humans more than the Lyrians. Many in our collective see this as a threat to the balance of power." Elias met her gaze without flinching. "We seek partnership, not dominance." Velair's smile tightened. "Words are easy. Actions show true intent. We have noticed increased human presence near several Lyrian outposts." Zyril felt a chill. The Lyrians were accusing the humans of expanding too quickly, possibly spying. "Captain Mar," Zyril said carefully, "have your people made any moves near Lyrian territories?" Elias shook his head. "Not without your permission. Our ships stay within agreed boundaries." Velair's eyes narrowed. "Your words will be watched closely." The meeting ended with a polite but clear warning. The Lyrian Collective was watching, and they would act if the Valari or humans upset the balance. Secret talks in the moonlit garden. That night, Elias and Zyril met in the palace's moonlit garden, a peaceful place with glowing flowers and soft fountains. "The Lyrians are cautious," Elias said. "They see us as a threat." Zyril sighed. "Their warning was not just for us. It was a message to you." He looked at her. "Do you think they will try to undermine our alliance?" "It's possible. The Lyrians do not like change." Elias took a deep breath. "Then we must be ready, but not with weapons or force. With trust, diplomacy, and the strength of our union." Zyril smiled softly. "You truly are different, Captain." An unexpected visitor. The next day, a mysterious visitor arrived, an envoy from a distant system called the Zafari. They were known as traders and travelers, often neutral in political matters, but skilled in gathering information. The Zafari envoy, a slim figure named Terrace, asked to meet Elias alone. Zyril agreed, curious but cautious. In a small chamber filled with soft light, Terrace spoke quietly. "Captain Mar, your reputation precedes you. I come with a warning." "About?" Elias asked. "There are forces beyond these talks, groups who wish to see the Valari and humans divided. They trade in secrets and lies." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Do you know who?" Terrace shook his head. "Not yet, but you should watch carefully." Rising suspicion over the next days, small incidents began to occur, messages lost, suspicious figures near the palace, whispered rumors of plots. Cyril and Elias worked closely, meeting with ministers and guards, trying to uncover the truth. Elias showed a skill for reading people, noticing details others missed. Once, during a council meeting, he quietly asked a minister a simple question, and the man's face betrayed a secret worry. Together, they started to piece together a web of intrigue stretching across the empire. A moment of calm one evening. After a long day, Cyril and Elias stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The stars above were bright and clear. "You've changed this empire," Cyril said softly. "And you've changed me," Elias replied. They stood together, feeling the quiet strength of their bond, ready to face whatever shadows might come.